Hello, everybody, and welcome to our session about digital ethics principles for ePortfolios. And if we can go to the next slide, what we'll be covering today is a short overview of our task force, which is concluding its second year of amazing work. We'll be introducing for the first time in public the second version of the principles that we've been working on all year. We'll talk about some goals, and we'll have a discussion for the better part of the session. And then we'll invite you, once you're inspired and excited to keep moving forward with us, to join our digital ethics task force, which is 2 words, but on that slide, it's 1. And we want to know more about you. Who are you? So tell us who you are, where you are, and what do you think about when you think about digital ethics and ePortfolios? What are 1 to 3 words or phrases that you associate with those concepts? And Megan Mize is putting a link in the chat to the Scalar document that we have that will be talking about our principles. Welcome, Melody. Tucson's hot this time of year. My colleague just moved there and has already had to get a rattlesnake out of his garage and put a tarantula into a mason jar. So he feels welcomed to the state. Hi, Kathy from IUPUI and Megan. Melody had a bobcat, so it sounds like a great place for wildlife. Jennifer, also from IUPUI, welcome. And ethics is something that you talk about with your professional and digital writing students all the time. So great. We hope that you'll give us feedback and consider giving us some suggestions. So on the next slide, we see that you can access these materials, not just through the links that we pose in the chat every so often, but we've got a link that you can type if you can remember Dig Ethics Conversation after the bit.ly. And if you're one of those newfangled type of folk who use a QR code, it's right there for you. Snap a pic with your camera on your phone, or if you take a picture with a regular camera and film, it'll take a while to develop and come back and probably won't work. So we'll also share the folder and a transcript of today's chat. So we're excited that you're here. And we have just a couple more things to say before we get into the heart of our discussion. We are excited to have you here, but we also want this to be a safe place psychologically and virtually. So we propose some criteria for us in our discussion today. And if you'd like to add any others that are important to you, please use the chat to do so. If you prefer, you can change your Zoom handle, the name associated with your image or what have you, to remain anonymous as you contribute ideas. And really the criteria we have are simple. Everybody's here to learn. And we also are here to challenge our own notions and biases. So we're going to listen without judgment. We're going to be open to receive feedback. We're going to discuss the concepts and not the people. And we're going to keep what people share in breakout rooms confidential. I think we're all good with those. If not, again, share those ideas that you have to tweak these guidelines and norms for our discussion today. And I'm going to hand the talking stick over to the group.
Okay, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about what this group is and what we've done thus far. So this is the group in its second year. This is the task force. As you can see, we have a pretty diverse group of professionals. We have some international representation and other representation from the ABLE community, which we're really excited about and we think has really added value to the document. The conversation facilitators, we've introduced ourselves in the chat, but myself, I'm from University of Denver, Sarah from App State, Megan from Old Dominion, and Kevin from San Francisco State. So we're also happy to chat offline throughout the conference and beyond. So feel free to message us I'm still learning how to use Slack. So if you want to use good old fashioned email, that's great, but I will also learn how to use Slack eventually. So we really started off this task force 2 years ago by identifying a need in the ePortfolio community. So we saw that this was an underdeveloped area of research and scholarship. And we also know that digital ethics is something that is always changing with new technologies, laws, and practices. So in our first year, everyone was really worried about data privacy. Where are universities storing their data? How are they storing it? And then COVID hit, and it just highlighted this whole new realm of ethical issues and concerns that honestly a lot of practitioners hadn't thought about. And so what we have learned is there is always going to be work to be done in this field, and it's important that the ePortfolio community at large really recognizes digital ethics as not optional, but central to what we do. And we also saw that this was an opportunity for an international organization like ABLE to advocate for ethically sound ePortfolio practice. So there are a lot of new practitioners that get a lot of their information from ABLE. And so by having that presence and by having digital ethics as kind of central to what the organization is talking about, we're able to catch those practitioners early. We also hope that this document is something that you can use to advocate for yourself, for funding, for your program, for ethical practices at the institution level, that this document kind of serves as backing for what we know are best practices. So here's a brief history. 2019, 2020 was a big year for us. So we started this off in September of 2019, which kind of originated from the annual meeting in 2019. And from September to January, we developed the first round of the principles. So this involved a lot of interdisciplinary conversations. Those of us on the task force come from different backgrounds and different areas of research. And so we're able to talk about how different fields are taking up these ethical issues. We looked at some sample documents and things like that and drafted our own in January. And then really the rest of 2020, January to the summer, was spent revising those principles and getting them ready for public viewing. And we launched those first principles in the annual meeting last year, and then spent the second year adding and revising to them. So this year we really asked ourselves, what's missing from this document now that we've learned now that we are learning what we're learning with COVID and what that looks like, what do we need to say now? And so we still definitely have a lot more to say, and we're trying to think about how to do that. And so we are excited to publish the second round of principles, but I think those of you that have published anything large that you've been working on, you're always ready to revise it. So now we are looking ahead to see what's next for these principles.
All right, we're passing between Megans. Hello, everyone. I'm Megan Mize. I'm at Old Dominion University. And so as Megan Haskins just mentioned, this last year is concluding our second year of the task force. And when we first started talking about the digital ethics principles, I think we really thought, oh yeah, we'll narrow all of these down to really clear, distinct principles, and we'll just knock this out. And even as we were drafting, we realized this is a massive conversation. Yep, if you'll go to the next slide, have that up. And so at this time, we have 13 principles. And in this last year, we had added 3 new ones. You can see the 3 new ones in bold, but just to cover really quickly what each of the principles touch upon, we have practice, we have diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and decolonization, all one principle, quite heady, a lot to cover there, but certainly timely conversation this past year. We have promote awareness of ePortfolio use, considering ethical support for ePortfolio use, making visible the labor involved in advocating, using, supporting ePortfolios. We talked about evaluation, accessibility, privacy issues, which I see many of you in the chat referenced. And when we first started, that was one of our first principles. We thought about privacy, and we noticed in COVID, our conversation shifted dramatically from privacy to some other elements. Content storage, access to technology, respect for author rights and reuse permissions, cross-platform compatibility, and consent for data storage. So as you can see, that's a lot of ground to cover, and we still don't think we've covered it all. But we really wanted to think about the fact that digital ethics is a wide-ranging concept that touches on many issues of digital assignment design and e-portfolio use. And if you'll move to the next slide. If you go to this bit.ly that's on the screen, and we'll share the link in the document or in the chat to Scalar, where our document is published, our second version. Thank you, Sarah. You'll see, if you just spend a little time on a principle, that each principle is formatted in a similar fashion. We have a short overview statement about what we think that digital concern is, that ethical concern is. We offer strategies for application. It was very important to us that these have practical application and don't just stay in the abstract. And then we tried to show these ethical concerns and solutions in action. So we offer hypothetical scenarios to show what that might look like in a local practice. It's all very good for Able to say you should think about X and you should do Y, but what does that look like at our various institutions and with our various identities? So we did try to offer some hypotheticals. And then, of course, we end with a list of related resources for each principle, many of which we're sure can be added to, but really to make sure this is grounded in the scholarship and in established practices, so that it's not just a group of folks saying, wouldn't it be nice if this happened, but instead to show that the research and experience supports the things that we're advocating for. So this is a conversation session. It's not just a panel. We really want to talk to you all. We've been talking to each other for 2 years, and it's a delight. And we're going to keep talking to each other for another year. But our goal, especially following this last year with a lot of discussions, is to open up the principles to our very big community and make sure all voices are invited to speak back, that we aren't missing extremely important components. And so in this conversation session, we're going to throw out 3 broad questions, and we will pose the question. We'll have one of the board members, the panel members, take a shot at it, but we're going to ask that you weigh in as well. And you are welcome to do it in the chat. You are welcome to open your mic and respond, and we'll call on you, because it is really important that this is a two-way thing. We're a community and none of this is top down. So please feel the invitation is extended and your voice is very much desired. All right. So again, the things that we're hoping will happen, and this is just the start of this conversation. We're going to be doing this over the next year, and as long as the principles exist, honestly, we're hoping you'll help us start to consider what might we be missing from these principles. Maybe I just read that list out loud and you thought, holy cow, I can't believe they missed X, right? What would make these more applicable in your context? Again, many of us come from very specific situations, and you may have suggestions how to make this practical for more people. And then the task force has a few goals for the 3rd year, which move beyond simply creating more principles and revising. But do you have suggestions on what else you think this task force should be doing in relation to digital ethics to make sure that we're really helping the ePortfolio community at large? Okay, so question 1. I know it's a mouthful. I'm gonna offer the question. I'm gonna throw it to one of my co-panelists, but I really ask you to think about it, maybe free write in the chat, and then we'll open each question up. So question 1, what principles, audiences, and experiences are missing from our current document? You can see the list below. I know you haven't necessarily had time to go into each principle, but how might we best address these gaps And so, Megan, do you feel comfortable taking a shot at this first?
Yeah, sure. I think that as much as we have tried to consider different audiences, the reality is that the task force is made up of mostly practitioners that have been doing this for a while. And so I think it's easy for us to read, some of the jargon that we talk about in ePortfolio world and think like, yeah, this definitely makes sense. But I wonder for the student voice, like if I'm an undergrad or graduate student reading these, what additional clarification might I need or different examples for application? Or even if I'm just new to the field and I'm reading this for the first time. So that's an audience or I guess a perspective that I'd like to expand in the future.
I do love the idea of ePortfolio world being a real place. I agree, Megan. Like what you just said anticipated something I was thinking about. I know some of our colleagues here at the conference have been interviewing and sharing student feedback, but it would be great to have student representatives on the task force because while we did try to think about what does this look like as a student to advocate for yourself in terms of author rights or data storage or something like that, we don't have any students on the task force, and it's been a minute since I've been one. So I think that would be really lovely, or asking people to pilot some of the principles and come back and tell us what was hard or what didn't work or what is too pie in the sky. Like these are some lofty ideals and sometimes it's just not going to happen. So what other solutions might come into play? And I'll ask our audience to weigh in a moment, but really quickly, I do want to point to the fact that we intended to have a principle on assessment, and that principle got really big, really fast. So it is on our list, but it became the evaluation one. We extracted evaluation and feedback out. So how about other folks? What are some thoughts you might have regarding what might be missing from this current document? Let's see.
We've got a couple ideas in the chat. Tracy talks about the idea of piloting and building a community of folks who are testing things out with their students. I'd take it one step further and maybe have, because I know we saw in the chat earlier that it may have been Jennifer who talks about ethics with her students. Why not take the principles to the students and have them do a mini hackathon, which I know we're going to do during this conference, to have them weigh in with, hey, these are the things that we feel are missing from our perspective. So that could be really cool. And then here's Jennifer. Not sure how to express it, but I've talked to my husband, an IT professional with decades of experience, about the problem of tech companies changing their privacy policies with very little notice or input from their users. And this is really worrisome for faculty who want to innovate and try new platforms, but don't want to get caught in an ethical conundrum when these platforms change. So that's a really good point. And I don't know if anybody on the panel wants to comment or opine about that.
Megan, your response there is really good. So I won't steal your spotlight.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, knowing who on your campus is responsible for that kind of thing, and realizing that we're not going to be legal professionals, nor is that an individual faculty's expectation. And we speak about this a little bit in the support principle, but I think being aware of who your support structures are on your campus and what those negotiations look like, and also, being privy to how to read those privacy agreements and talking to your students about that as well, I think is really important. It's also hard because we live in an age where many students just kind of assume that their data is going everywhere and they don't really think a lot about it. And adults, practitioners are the same way. So I think really talking about the consequences and the expectations is really important. But yeah, there's only so much we can do, right? We can only be so informed if they're going to change it anyway.
Well, and this might be For those of you who don't know me, I love to throw ideas out that I hope I never have to implement. But maybe for things like the point that Jennifer just made, future iterations of this document, maybe the task force, instead of designing more principles, design some sample assignments or tutorials on how to train faculty and or students on how to tackle, privacy policy, staying on top of things. So that because again, the point of the document is practicality, things that we can use, things that don't require us, to become legal experts, but maybe we start collecting a kind of repository of assignments and activities that we could then link out to each principal.
I'm going to expand on something I just threw in the chat. What if you scrape the end user license agreement? If you're going to ask your students to use a certain piece of software for ePortfolios or any other purpose, put it into Hypothesis and have students go to town. What do you think this means? What's missing? Why? How are you in danger here? How are you protected? And make it a conversation before asking students to click the button, which they're going to do without reading. So if you make it part of the assignment, then you could change the nature of that dialogue.
I was going to just follow up, Kevin. In the past, sometimes I've let students, if they prefer, we use Digication at State, but if they want to use a different platform, I've allowed them to do that. But part of what they have to do is write a proposal for why, and part of that proposal has to include their analysis of the user agreement for whatever platform they've chosen to use, right? So they have to actually kind of go in and do that work and talk about like how that's appropriate for them. And that's been really, really useful in starting student conversations in the past about those things, because they never read them unless, it's an assignment.
This is Melody. I have a couple of questions and then about this, because I think it's really good. I'm kind of reading through this. Of course, this is the first time I'm seeing this. One thing that kind of jumps out to me that I was kind of the first question I had when I entered this conversation was, how do you define ethics? And I don't know if there's, I looked in your glossary of key terms, and there's no ethics in there. So I don't know if you want, I don't know, maybe it's too broad. Maybe you didn't want to define it. So I don't know if you could speak to that. That's the first question. The second question I have is this, this seems to be really US centric. And I think you're starting to get at culture a little bit with your diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, decolonization area. But I think culture is really important, and how different cultures or people from different cultures would perceive an e-portfolio. Some would be put off by flashiness. Some would like embrace it. And so I think touching on cultures, because we live in a global society now. So when our students are putting out a portfolio or a faculty's putting out a portfolio, I think it's important to be mindful that there's a lot of different cultures out there, and what's your target audience, and how are you going to address the ethics of that culture? Because ethics is kind of like a moving target among cultures. So those are two areas I would, I don't know, thinking about.
Melody, those are both really fabulous. And I was writing down notes as you were talking, but first, because I actually want to address your second one, I'm going to ask if anybody would like to tackle what do we define ethics as, and why is that not yet in our scalar? Because that's a fabulous point. Before I just talk a lot, because I will. All right, I'll take it. All right, so we actually, you caught us out, because at first we were treating definitions as really like we were grabbing ones that we thought these are ones that are not commonly shared, right? We started adding that in and doing tagging and categorizing. In the second year, we started realizing that's a lot more important than version 1 of us realized. And so that's on our list to do, because it was like, well, we've defined access, but we didn't define ethics. And part of it is, again, you said it rightly, many of us have a different definition of what that is and what we think that is. I think our goal for this coming year we have a workshop series that we've proposed where we continue doing this kind of discussion with multiple audiences to try to reach at a larger consensus of what the ABLE and ePortfolio community thinks we mean by digital ethics. Because a lot of times we see people kind of gear one way towards like privacy tends to be the first thing, but we actually came to think of it as far more expansive than that. So I think we're hoping to define it more communally than just the handful of folks on the task force setting the pace for us at large. But it is a good question. It is actually on our agenda. Like that is really key. And I would love to talk about, yeah, there you go, Sarah. I did want to start talking about that globalized point that you made. And then of course, any of the other panelists are welcome to jump in. We do have colleagues from around the world who have been helping us define this. They have been very courteous when some of us are a little too Americanized and very situated in our space. But I was thinking, you're really kind of pointing us towards another principle, potentially like cultural rhetorics or global ways of knowing, which is some research I'm doing with a colleague here. Because again, just as you said, anytime we, as an institution or a course or a program, talk about, i.e. what makes effective ePortfolio practice, we're importing a series of cultural values. And so I think that is another potential principle that we put in here, making visible that not all cultures and not even all fields have the same ways of knowing and value the same things. So I think what you've really uncovered there is a new principle that we need to get in depth with. And as an English scholar, I would love to couch that in rhetorical language, because you mentioned audience analysis and all of that. So other folks on the panel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I just was going to follow up and say that I think it's a great question. And I think it speaks to, like, always needing to expand the diversity of our task force, which is one of the things that we're really trying to do here today in terms of talking to all of you. We have membership from Australia and New Zealand, and that's wonderful. And like Megan was saying, they have taught us, I think, a lot. And you see it in very minor ways. So I'll give you an example. But it really important, like it's minor in the sense that it could go easily unnoticed. But when we started writing these principles, specifically the scenarios for the principles, we were thinking about different audiences for the scenarios, and we were thinking about students as an audience and teachers as an audience and administrators as an audience. And some of our non-US colleagues brought up the fact that educator is actually a much better term to use to refer to who we were just calling teachers, because educator covered a lot of different people in the classroom in different cultural contexts. And I think, and portfolio platform developers, that's also true, Kevin. And so I think that the more we can bring in those voices, and I loved also what you said, Megan, about not just thinking culture in terms of location and sort of those global practices, but also in terms of discipline, because I think that is another thing that we've struggled with in terms of diversity that has been really helpful. Like Christine works with a lot of people in the medical field, right? And so those portfolios, that the idea of portfolios in that context is very different than, for instance, in my area of writing and general education. We're dealing with very different students and very different levels of professionalization and needs. And so anytime we can bring in people who have cultural or disciplinary diversity to say, hey, this is missing, like there's a kind of gap here, or here's how we talk about this in my context, I think that is incredibly valuable for us and something that is just going to kind of stay on our to-do list for a long time. So thanks, Melody.
I'll just toss in, because we're talking about diversity in this context. Christina Hübner and I, she's out in New Zealand, but when we started tackling the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and decolonization principle, we knew that we too, even though we were in two different countries, were not a complex enough set of voices for that principle. So we conducted interviews with Indigenous scholars, women faculty of color, a wide range of people, and you'll see them credited with sharing their ideas. And they even gave us feedback on the finished principle at the end. And I think that's something that we can do more, is to pull in those extra voices, even if they're not on the task force officially, pull in their voices and ask for feedback, because we know that if you just look at the theory of what makes teams successful, it's the diversity of the people in it. And so that's what I'm hoping for year 3, is that we do, not only through this call that we'll remind everybody to join us at the end of this session, but through outreach to specific people for small contributions, for feedback, or for generating new ideas.
With assessment, one thing it might be useful for our purposes, just to reiterate it in more than one context, is e-portfolios within assessment practices at a course level, and then a program level, and then like an institutional level, because we've really struggled with articulating how e-portfolios can be used, and also when students have to use or create multiple e-portfolios for different components. So we do one in foundations writing, and then now we'll do one in general education, and then capstone. So yeah, I think that would be really helpful to clarify for us.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely just put your finger right on when we started building out the document. It just got bigger, because we were like, well, what about programs, and what about the institution? And certainly we would love more people to help us kind of maybe chip that down, or think about ways that we can make that more consumable, because it just became so overwhelming. No one, you know, when we were thinking about, well, we want this to be available to all practitioners, but of course, part of it is keeping our eye on having more people join our field. And I don't want to hand you a 25-page document about assessment, but I think you're absolutely right. And we know there is a urgent need for that kind of discussion, because I am sure many of you are put in that position where people are like, well, how can we use this for assessment? And sometimes, you know, sometimes I don't know that my colleagues are always doing everything, since this is the digital ethics, it's not always the most ethical approach to those things. So yes, Emily, I agree. And we would love for you to join us in that effort. But yes, those 3 levels are incredibly important. And also I've seen part of what's sticky is when they're being used to evaluate things that are kind of outside of academic structures, you know, kind of the extracurricular and co-curricular stuff. So all that to say is I'm an enthusiastic agreement with you on that need.
And I would also just plug, you know, this is not fleshed out, but we are hoping to do a workshop series based on these principles. And I know that at least 3 of us are very interested in how e-portfolios can be used for assessment. So that's definitely the type of thing, Emily, that I think we would love to draw people in and have kind of a working time. Not that we would be giving you all the answers, but assessment is just so tied to your institutional context and what that looks like, that I think having some time and space to really work through that would be great.
This is Melody again. This kind of prompts me to think about, I know you have evaluation on here, and it kind of ties in to assessment. And going back to the ethics of it, you know, when I was doing my comprehensive exams, and I turned in an e-portfolio, and my people on my committee didn't know how to evaluate it, right? And then and thinking about it from an ethical point of view, it's very subjective. So what one person would, say is passable, another person would say is not passable. So I don't know if you tackle the ethics of evaluation from a subjective point of view when looking at portfolios. I don't know. That's a deep one. That's a hard one. Don't know how to tackle that one.
I'm going to muck my way in that we had conversations about it. And again, it's one of those things that started to go beyond our grasp, like it get very large. We were talking about something very similar where, and I think this is going back to that earlier suggestion, maybe we could start including samples or tutorials or something, sample activities, like how do I calibrate colleagues on reading portfolios, teaching them to know what are they reading for in that instance, because my colleagues who are not in the same field often will go for, did this portfolio look pretty? I'm going to judge it on its aesthetics and its visual design. And I have to pull them back and say, well, what was it that we were actually training that student on? What is it that we're really looking for? Is that the meat of the thing you're looking at? We do touch on it, but we talk about the fact that when people bring very subjective value systems into play, we sometimes see implicit bias come through, in which, again, they'll read an image through a particular filter and thus decide the whole portfolio must not be good because I don't like her hair in this shot or something like that. So I think when we do tackle the assessment, that we need to give some potential practical tips, tutorials for helping folks who are not necessarily savvy consumers of e-portfolios engage with them. And one more thing before I open the floor back up is that I also find a lot of my colleagues tend to skip the evidence that students put in their portfolios. Like they'll read the framing content, but they won't look at the actual essays or whatever the student is putting in there. And they're like, well, I didn't see them working with partners. And it's like, well, that was in the video that you didn't watch. So teaching our colleagues to read multimodality, and valuing that too beyond just the alphabetic text. I think that's all a part of evaluation and assessment practices, so that they read the whole thing and engage with all of it and value it as is appropriate to the moment. Do others have thoughts on that? I see a lot of chat going on the side. Brilliant.
I would say it's something that when we work with our students to create e-portfolios, I know we talk a lot about reflection statements and also audience. Megan Mize put a potential audience that's missing might be employers. And so when I work with my students, I tell them they need to light up the runway because each audience is going to come to an e-portfolio fresh, and they're not possibly going to know what's the best path. It's like a choose your own adventure book. If you remember those, I might have just dated myself, but the idea is that you can't control necessarily how people are going to navigate your e-portfolio and what they're going to take away from it, what they're going to skip because they may be busy at that moment and may forget the next time they come back. And so we all believe that our work is the most enticing and exciting thing on the planet. And so we expect that people are going to be riveted and touch every little artifact in the ePortfolio, but it might require a little guidebook. Let's say, hey, I'm sending you my ePortfolio, and for you, Madam Employer, or for you, dissertation chair, these are the things I really think you should note. And it's almost like a cover letter for a resume. You're going to put together some sort of guidance for what you think they should review as part of whatever experience you're trying to get them to have, whether it's to hire you, which, right, we were talking yesterday about TikTok resumes, and today we're talking about making sure that the people who are assessing our achievement and performance know how to get there. It's the same way with an oral exam. If they don't ask the right questions to show that you understand something, you're still in a tough space. So it's trying to make it more of a conversation than, here, I've put this piece of art in the world and you interpret it how you like. You need to help drive the discussion.
Tracy and I, this is Melody again. Tracy and I were in the chat talking about a little bit about rubrics. And I just want to, I have a parallel that my scholarship is digital storytelling, which in some ways is like ePortfolio is just a different kind of medium. And when I was doing my research, I had a rubric, and the rubrics are a double-edged sword. So yes, they give students a guide. Sometimes it's too much of a guide. Sometimes it's not enough of a guide. So rubrics in some ways are problematic, but they do help on the ethical side because I think they give some framework to what how we can assess students, because students, it's not just nebulous. It's like, okay, I know these are the things that they're going for. And I think sometimes in my research, what I found is the first 2 years I had a grad student go with the students who were being, who I was studying, and she used the rubric like a stick. Man, I mean, the students hated the project because she just used that rubric as a stick. When I went with the students from my last 3 years of studying, I used it as a carrot. And it was a lot better because they were like, oh, these are guidelines. I can weave in and out of these, but I still have some standard to what I'm being assessed on, but I can actually go out and be creative, which is, I think, what you want with portfolios. You don't want to just have this strict guideline to stay within this ethical framework. You want students to be able to have a little bit of room to move in and out of that rubric. So I think when we're using rubrics, and I think they're a great tool, we just need to be a little careful about how we administer them. So I just wanted to continue that. It's a really great conversation Tracy and I are having over in the chat. So.
Well, I'm actually going to move us to our second question. I am so thrilled and grateful that you guys are conversing with us. I actually think question 2 is a great outgrowth of what we've just been chatting about. So what additional resources would help others engage with, employ, or respond to these principles? What would increase the applicability of this resource? Because we want it to not be something that just sits on the internet. We want it to be something people feel they can go to and use in some meaningful way. And Kevin, I believe you had something you wanted to kind of weigh in response to this question.
You bet. So building on the idea that we'd love to have the student voice more present with the principals, I think it would be a fantastic addendum. I don't know what the right word is, but to have maybe some video-based comments from students about how to apply these to their work. Because if you look at the strategies, I would say that the great portion of them are focused on educators, even if it's the educator helping the student do X. Very few of them are written, students will do X. And so having that extra step of students talking to students through video rather than text might be a really interesting way to increase the employment and applicability of the principles.
I think it's a lovely suggestion. It circles back to earlier, kind of, I think when I was like, it would be really helpful to have student voices on the task force and students from, I think, all stages in the process. What a graduate student needs is very different from an undergraduate student. And of course, we can talk about all the other identity vectors. So I think, Kevin, that would be really lovely, because right now they are really situated in a very particular point of view. We try, but I think we're so removed. And I had another thought and it just went out of my head while I was complimenting you. So it's very important to give Kevin that. One thing I do think in terms of increasing applicability is in our 3rd year, we proposed, and I know I mentioned it before, but a series of workshops where we pull out 1 or 2 of these principles and work with participants really closely, both to critique the principle, but also consider ways we might practice that principle. And I'm thinking if we use those workshops as a space to also gather from the larger community these examples that we're saying might be helpful, assignments, activities that show that principle in action, that might also make this a more practical resource for people and a living resource, I think. Do others have thoughts? Oh yeah.
I was gonna, based on that, I'm constantly looking for, like, I'm working on a website right now related to learning equity. And I want to have a share your story section where people talk about it in practice. And so that would be another exciting aspect. The way Merlot, if any people are familiar with that multimedia resource collection, they have a space for people to share how they used a resource that was freely shared by someone else in the world. And so it would be neat to build on that by having people who have used the principles share how they're using them.
I agree. I love that idea of humanizing this. Tracy, would you say more about what you just put in the comments?
Well, just as you said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, we need like an institute on e-portfolios and digital ethics so that people can join and over time build some skill in this area. I love that idea. I'm sure there's a way we could credential that or, do badges or something. But it also struck me that why not come and learn to build that skill with your students in tow, so, you get that shared perspective about what will work and what doesn't. And that sort of speaks to that earlier point in the chat where I talked about my colleague who was, using the rubrics to evaluate student portfolios and then went, oh no, we've asked the students to tell their stories, but now we're not valuing them because they don't adhere to a structure that we think is relevant in the context of our institution. So they're working to change that. But yeah, I just think having that shared conversation and building that into this document somehow would be really powerful.
I really love that idea of it being an institute that people could bring students to, because I know within my own institution, when I'm doing faculty development, I sit there and have some of these conversations with faculty and they smile and nod at me and they're like, oh, it's really important. And we're going to have them practice it, but it's never made explicit to the students that they are practicing that or learning that activity. And also they have different use patterns, right? And so again, talking about trying to make them meet us how we use digital media, they could help us inform the emerging digital practices and thus flag for us emerging digital ethical concerns, right? That we may not be aware of yet. Kevin, I saw that article on the TikTok resumes and I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I think there may be some potential emerging issues there that we haven't fully explored yet, but it would be helpful to do in tandem with students who are facing that reality.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of that I'm really interested in is how does attending an institute like this actually change our practice and make the student learning experience deeper and more rich and meaningful? And I think, thinking of faculty development, of course, I work with faculty too all the time. And yeah, I can say they came to a workshop, but I want to now go, how has this actually changed their practice and made the student experience better? So maybe that could be something to think about in a series as well.
It's wonderful. I'm sorry, I'm catching up in our chat. It's always helpful to see so many coming through. Emily, would you talk a bit? You mentioned Salt Lake Community College, who of course they're doing brilliant, but could you expand upon what you think it would be helpful? They have a resource, but what more do you want from that?
Yeah, I think it'd be really helpful to hear from a wider range of institution types and faculty from different disciplines, how they take up e-portfolios in their different contexts and classrooms, because Salt Lake Community College is amazing, but also a very specific university context, and also has such a wonderful buy-in already. And so it would be helpful to hear just also, it'd be cool to have that graduate student perspective as well. So if we're also thinking about those short videos with students, having that kind of wide range would be useful. And then it also might be useful to have alumni students come and talk about like, this is how this helped, you know, a year out, 5 years out, and things like that. So I think this video thing, and also what Melody was saying about digital storytelling, could be a great opportunity. One thing I'm just noticing as we're doing this brainstorming is this website is going to just expand and expand. So I don't know if there's like a possible solution to kind of that overwhelming task, but yeah, I already am just like, wow, y'all have done so much, and it just keeps growing.
Well, you know what, Emily, I'm going to take you with me to every conference, because that was a great segue to question 3, which you're absolutely right. This document is, we think, pretty large as it is, and we already know that it will grow. And, you know, that maybe isn't necessarily the worst thing, but we do want to make it approachable and usable. And so the question 3 is, what should the future of this document look like in terms of scope, audience, mode, etc.? And so I'm going to toss it to Sarah, because we have some thoughts on that, but we invite you all to weigh in as well.
I'll just go really quickly, because I would love to hear from other people. And Emily Jo, I was laughing at the end because you were saying that, and I was like, oh, this is the perfect segue to the third question, which I think about a lot because I've done a lot of the work on Scalar, which is the platform we chose to use to publish the principles. And we picked it because we thought it modeled some of what we wanted people to see, right? It allowed us to hyperlink between ideas and to create this kind of networked sense of the principles. And in fact, you can do a lot with Scalar that I haven't even like gotten into yet, just because of time constraints, really, in terms of sort of connecting ideas across different pages or different media. And it's also kind of a platform that's been created for this kind of purpose. And so we wanted to use it, but I often think, is there a better way, right? Like, is there a different mode? Is there a different way to think about scope? Who are we leaving out in terms of audience by using this platform versus something else that might be simpler or more straightforward? And so we've also like provided the version 1. So there is a version 1 of these principles, and it is, it doesn't have the 3 new principles, but it's also different in some other ways. But it's on Scalar, and we also have a PDF version, right? For people who might want more of that kind of like, if they wanted to print it out, or if they just wanted a more kind of straightforward linear read. We don't have a PDF yet of the second version, but that's in the works. So anyway, that just to speak to your question, I would love to know anybody's opinion about any of those things, because I think that is going to be an ongoing question for the task force and for the principals as they grow as a resource.
I am also super aware of the time, so I just wanted to say I'm going to also do a shameless plug and drop the IJEP article that recently was published. This gives a lot more context, as well as, like Sarah was saying, a little bit more linear version of version 1. But I'm going to go ahead and shift us to Kevin so that we can make sure we have time. Oh yeah, thanks, Kevin. Sorry for being the person that used the jargon.
Yes, thank you, Megan H. And so hopefully we've excited you, we've gotten you interested. We started at 8 a.m. out here in California, and I know I didn't need my Irish breakfast tea this morning because this conversation kept me mentally stimulated. So we are going to put out a call for the year 3 of this task force. The call will go out by September 1st. You don't need to wake anybody up when September ends, as Green Day sings. We're going to start right on day 1 of September, collecting those CVs and statements why you want to be involved. And so as we've been saying all along, we want a diverse group, including all the voices that we can find around the world. And we hope that you'll consider joining us. I'll also put in the chat a link to the evaluation that we hope you'll also give us some feedback about this session, and consider joining us for the Digital Ethics Hackathon, which is another session during this ABLE conference where we'll be able to take these discussions in a new direction, where you can give more feedback about ways that we can make it a richer, navigable experience. And it looks like we have one more bit.ly link for you. It wouldn't be a conversation without a bit.ly link. So we'll ask you to continue the discussion with us. And we know there's a Slack environment, but we've put together a Padlet page, did ethics convo, and we hope that you'll join us there to give us more feedback as you have more time to review the principles.